Today I'm going to talk about a series of books I've recently read that are all tied together of the theme of being specifically set in Japan, written by Japanese authors, obviously translated to English. And again, as I mentioned in my June video, I was talking about the fact that we are headed there eventually. We have booked the tickets, it's happening, just a little ways out, but the work time off has been approved. We are going, it's happening. I can't cancel these tickets. Very excited for that. And because of that, I was just in the mood to read books that were all set around the place that I'm very excited to go to. So some of these books are dark fiction. There are some that are a little bit lighter in the mix here. And again, I do have a nonfiction book at the end, and I just really enjoy these books overall. These are also not the books that I put on my June TBR, because apparently I've become that person who is terrible at sticking to the books that I said I was going to read. So I did read Japanese fiction, just pretty much none of the books, or at least I think there's only one of those books that actually made it from the TBR onto the wrap-up list. So I am sorry, I'm that person now. But if you're interested, here's what I did read and here's what I thought. Let's get started. First up, let's start with the book that did survive my TBR, and that is Butter. This is a piece of obviously translated Japanese fiction. In it, we follow this gourmet chef who, at the beginning of the story, you find out that she is in prison for murdering all of these men, and so you find out more of why she's there, intersects with another woman who doesn't have the same culinary experience as her, and so the story intertwines these women. It's an interesting story that intersects, of course, good food, but also, of course, with the topic of murder. There's a lot of commentary in this book. It deals a lot with how society treats women, specifically as they gain weight, their relationship with food, all of that. And the portrayal of that is not very kind. So I will say that if you're sensitive to how books handle body imagery and so forth, it's definitely not a body positive book. In my mind, as I was reading it, I was waffling back and forth about whether or not the book was truly negative or if it was the character's opinions, and really whether or not that was reflective of what the author was trying to portray. Because again, is it trying to portray the reality, or is the author putting her own judgments and prejudice into the story? This is one that, I'll be honest, worked a little bit better in premise rather than execution. I love the intersection in general of food and this darker fiction narrative, but it wasn't quite as dark and delicious as I want to describe it to be. I enjoyed how the main character just hates margarine and loves the true product of butter, and that is all woven in. And I think this one just for me wasn't as satisfying, and I've seen that for other readers. I think this one got a lot of big buzz. It was very popular. And then I did see other reviewers, I know it's not just me, who do feel like this book is a little bit more popular than maybe it deserves. Definitely exciting to see a topic like this taken from a Japanese angle. But was I completely in love with this story? Am I obsessed with it? Did it just make me crave rich, delicious food while I was reading this dark, creepy story? No, I kind of wanted to. Maybe it's a good thing it didn't, but it did leave me a little bit unsatisfied, no pun intended. I still would recommend trying it out if you're curious, but I personally didn't find it to be a 5-star read, and I don't know if it's going to hit that high for other people. Next, we have The Devotion of Suspect X, and this is a mystery thriller that I completely recommend. If you're a fan of the genre, this one is solid. It starts out with a woman who is living with her only child, her daughter. Her ex-husband comes around, there is an encounter, something terrible happens, and then we have the police trying to piece together what happened, who is responsible for this man's disappearance, and so forth. While I'm being a little bit quieter in terms of how I'm describing this book, just know that we do get perspectives of our main characters, so it is more explicitly shown to us as the reader of who did what and so forth. So we have the police trying to figure out what happened, but we as a reader are aware of a lot more as the story unfolds. And a lot of it really deals with the premise of what do you do when something happens and how to get away with it. I've noticed I've now read several books on the same topic of these Japanese thrillers that involve women having to deal with these very abusive husbands or ex-husbands. It strangely seems to be a very popular thematic choice or plot point in Japanese thrillers. I don't know what that says about the culture. Everyone has their different twist on the domestic story, and so this seems to be the popular one, at least over the past years in Japan. So needless to say, this one completely hooked me in. I found the main character's perspective immediately likable. I could be sympathetic and understand her motivations. You get to see the daughter and how she is affected by everything going on. And you also get the police perspective, which again are not framed as the villains of the story, but instead they're there to do their job. And there is more going on. It's not quite as cut and dry as I'm describing it, but I don't want to give away more and instead just let you enjoy it as it progresses. And so I felt like it's a kind of story where it's like an onion where you're peeling away the layers, or a chocolate cake if you prefer that analogy, but really one where, again, it's a rich story, well-developed characters. Often I say that I feel like sometimes either the characters or the writing can get lost in the translation. Did not find that the case here, so really a quality work all around. If you're a fan of mysteries, which I am, I used to read mysteries all the time. It used to be where I started as a dark fiction reader, and this seems to be the year that is coming back around, and I just enjoy a really good twisty mystery. And if you enjoy that, or more of a thriller, as long as it's less action-based, highly recommend this one. It is such a good story, highly addictive, and well worth your time. Also, thank you to the subscriber who made a comment on a previous video recommending this, because I did pay attention. I picked up the book because of you, and I want to say thank you for giving me that recommendation. Completely worth it. Next we have After Dark by Haruki Murakami. I've read several of his books before and tend to really enjoy them, so this is one I actually read a while back, but I'm just getting around to finally including it in a wrap up here. I think it fits in well. And so this is one where we follow a woman who meets a man at a restaurant. He lets her know that he believes that he knows her sister, and they end up having this connection and agree to spend the night together, not in a romantic way, but just spending that time together. It is a strange mix of almost a slice of life story. In a way it is a dark story, but in other ways it is again one that is really about people just being people in a moment in life. It's one that I probably don't love as much as I do his other work, and largely for me it falls into the fact that I didn't find it to be as memorable as I'd like it to be. I thought the characters and their story were interesting. It might just be my own preference that anything that feels more slice of life, just because it feels like a moment in time that isn't necessarily so significant in the grand scheme of things, it feels kind of like a fleeting moment, enjoyable to read, but not necessarily the kind of thing that lasts a lifetime. And that's kind of how I feel, especially as I've had more space from this one. Needless to say, I do enjoy this author's writing. I know it's a little bit controversial. Some people do not like how he handles characters. I'd say this one is safer than his others. If you're concerned about some of the less than feminist parts to his stories, I didn't see less of that here, so definitely know it's a safe place to start. It's also very short, and I think it's generally representative of his work. I just don't think it's his best, so it just depends where you'd want to start. But I'm glad I checked it off the list. At this point, I do want to read through the majority of his backlist and see which ones also work for me. Next, we have Convenience Store Woman, which is a cute contemporary Japanese fiction novel that has been on my radar for quite a while. We follow a young woman who works at a local convenience in Japan, and she is very happy with her life there. She is not married and is happy about that. She's happy to be single. She presents as what I saw to be as coded to be autism. It was never defined on the page, but I do appreciate that it had that representation, which in my mind felt to be there, but not in a way to make fun of the character, as I found a problem in other books like Made by Needy Prose, where I felt like that book was making the character the brunt of the joke. Instead, while she has what could be described as some quirky personality moments in the story, it felt like it was part of her personality and not meant to be a negative from the perspective of the reader. In the story, she really explores the fact that people see her position and her job as very limiting. They find it very strange that she doesn't want to achieve more in life and have a bigger career. And they're also, especially in this traditional culture that she resides in, she sees that there's a lot of social pressure to be married, to go towards that life, and she doesn't necessarily want that. She is very happy being with herself, and I found her perspective in general refreshing, because even in stories that aren't marketed as being romance books, there always seems to be this underlying fact that every story, or every author assumes that every story needs a romance subplot within it. So I found that kind of be a nice change of pace, where it is very much part of the narrative that she is pushing against it, and not necessarily wanting all of the romantic aspects to it. Not that there isn't some potential that grows within the story, but it's really pushing against the narrative of what women should be in society, and what if she just wants to be herself, live her own life, and define what that looks like. So refreshing, super cute. Definitely way lighter than the normal dark fiction that I review on my channel. but I gotta admit, sometimes I'm a sucker for that, and it was really well done. And I also read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is a super cute contemporary magical realism story, which again is outside of my normal wheelhouse for what I review on this channel, but it's been so buzzy online. I feel like it's been the book club pick for every Canadian book club I've seen out there and so forth. And so I finally did check it out. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure about it at first, but once I got further into the story, it did grow on me. The basic premise is that individuals come to this coffee shop where they have the ability to travel back in time. However, there are rules to that. Specifically, even if they travel back in time, anything in the past, they cannot change the past. They come back to the present and the past remains as it was. The other thing required is that they do need to come back before the coffee gets cold and finish their cup. And so there is this time crunch within here. Otherwise, they will potentially die and have to take the place of the individual that currently haunts the coffee shop. Normally, I associate magical realism with cute and cozy vibes, but I was very pleased to find this one felt much more somber and serious in terms of the tone, given the subject matter. The basic premise is that we follow these different characters who have regrets. They look back in their life and wonder if they could change something, if they could go back in time, and want to go back in time even though they know and are told that they cannot change things. And I found it to be really refreshing. It's less science fiction and more so, again, that literary device of a character changing perhaps not the past, but actually their own perspective on it through going. It's very emotional and quiet and very thoughtful. It is quite short, so again, it's the kind of story that I feel like doesn't outstay its welcome. If it was a lot longer, I might have felt differently. I know there are additional books I can check out, so let me know if the sequels are worth it, but I do recommend it if you like magical realism. Personally, I'm pretty hit or miss on the genre, but I think that this one was really well done. It's big and buzzy here for a reason, and I can definitely see why. And finally, I read People Who Eat Darkness by Richard Lloyd Parry, and this is actually a reread for me. I read it last year, but actually reread it in preparation for this video. It is one of the most haunting true crime stories that I have read. The basic setup is it follows, of course, a true case where there's a woman who went missing in Japan, and we followed the journalist who followed after the story. I appreciate that he was very respectful of the victim's perspective. So within here, he really is looking at who she was as a person, really setting up her past, her family, and making sure that she has a face as this story is presented. And then it really dives into what happened to her as best they know with the information available. It's a really interesting book to read from a cultural perspective, as often you will hear about the fact that Japan is considered to be one of the safest places to travel to and live in terms of overall crime, especially talking about violent crime. And so it's an interesting kind of switch and bait of the fact that you're seeing a different side, something that isn't talked about as much because it's less prevalent, but of course every exception exists, and so there are cases, and it's a very dark side to the underbelly of the nation and some of the things that are happening in the shadows. And it was just, again, the word I want to use, haunting, because it was a story that really emotionally swayed me. I think that the author is just an amazing narrative writer. So while it is nonfiction, he very much writes it into a cohesive narrative that you will follow through and have it not just be a bunch of facts, but really turning it into a thread that you can follow. I'll admit I am hesitant to even include this in the video. I've definitely gotten some pushback on my recent true crime content. I ended up privatizing the last video I put out on true crime just because a lot of people felt that I was being very disgusting of even promoting or showing any interest or enjoyment from stories that of course derive from other people's pain. I am hesitant to always know if I should just not include it. I'm certainly aware of the disassociation of how I find these stories fascinating, and if there is a way to appropriately and humanely consume content that is like this, if it is just always ethically wrong to be drawn to stories of darkness that do come from true events. I'm not really sure. I'll probably back off, but I always do like to be transparent to my audience that I do read these stories. I am mindful. I purposely will put down stories that I feel are not focused on the victims, or books that I feel like really glamorize the serial killer, etc. And so I am mindful of what I consume, but I do still consume it. And if that is too much, definitely, again, I can just, exclude this entirely from my channel, but definitely I'm trying to be more mindful of how I talk about it, because especially when I'm talking about books I've discussed multiple times on my channel, sometimes in re-summarizing them for videos like this, I can truncate my feelings and often skip over the parts that are most important and come across as a very shallow person, which I do not want to be. I do not want to be that person. I don't mean to put forward that side of myself. I think that's pretty ugly, and so I feel very torn about my consumption of these stories, and it's always something that is a moving target for me of what I feel to be okay or not in my own reading life. Anyway, let's wrap it up here. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out? And of course, I would love for you to share even more recommendations for other dark fiction Japanese books that you would recommend. I really do take your recommendations because, again, the book I talked about, Devotion of Suspect X, was specifically a book that one of you told me to read in my June TBR video, and I immediately went, found it in my library, and read it that day, or at least started it that day. So thank you so much. I do pay attention to your recommendations. I take them, and often enough they become favorites, which is why I just keep asking. I can't help myself. So if you're new to my channel, hopefully you stick around, subscribe. You can hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a video from me. Give me a thumbs up if you think I deserved it. Drop a comment, even just an emoji, lets me know you're here. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.